Welcome to Caddy Lunch and Learn. Thank you for joining us for a 30-minute lunch debate today. We have two speakers, Dan and Sarah. Just a little housekeeping, we'll all be muted to avoid any background noise, and I would encourage all of you to put your questions into the chat and we'll run through them later. So today, we're going to speak about drive-thrus and retail parks that you drive to. Customers love the convenience of drive-thrus and retail parks. Will out-of-town shopping beat the high streets? Can drive-thrus break out of fast food and into new sectors? How will these consumer trends affect brand strategy and investment decisions?
Thanks, Neha, for the introduction, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. And if you're listening later on the podcast or on YouTube, then we hope you enjoy it and we look forward to your questions. So retail parks, we'll start with that one. And from your first question, Neha, I mean, there's some really obvious benefits for customers with these larger formats. You've got that perhaps that post-COVID comfort factor of not being hugger-mugger to people next to other people like you are in a smaller store. Obviously easy access, convenient location, the parking is easy, it tends to be free. You don't have to worry about how long you're spending there, possibly a more relaxing experience. And of course, click and collect. The click and collect is easy, the returns are easy, and with omni-channel becoming more and more important, and that's really useful. From an operator point of view, of course, that also means that processing your returns is easier because you're doing it in the same place. And because a larger format also offers the retailer a chance to make a real destination out of town centre, perhaps in a way that's harder for a town centre one. Lower business rates and standard units are just probably easier to design for, easier to configure. So I think there's quite a lot of on paper reasons why retail parks are proving more popular. I think when you really look at who's doing well, Marks and Spencer, probably the most obvious example, because they're reshaping their estate. They're moving from high streets to these new sites, which tend to be nearby, but are specifically in out of town locations usually. And what they're talking about is creating a more productive estate. So, an estate that works better for them and for the customers and allows them to create these real destinations. And there's a lot of excitement generated about new openings. They're doing a lot on social media. They're doing a lot with TikTok. They really are generating excitement in local areas. They're making a big splash. They're making a big fuss. They've put a lot of investment into the store. So it's not purely a question of we're trying to attract people to out of town because it's efficient and practical and functional. There's a lot of work going into making that a really enjoyable experience that, perhaps lasts a bit longer than a traditional popping into a shop.
Sure, I think so. And I think also the other side of this is that in the UK, at least from a landlord perspective, retail parks are one of the few retail assets that are recovering well from COVID and where they are seeing returns that are getting close to pre-COVID levels. In a couple of examples, they're actually higher already, but for the most part, that's going to be a slow recovery. But if there's investment going into any retail property at the moment, it's much more likely to be in retail parks than anywhere else, certainly than in town centres or high streets or traditional destinations where there's a lot less certainty and there's a lot of change, in part for the reasons that Sarah's talked about, which is that customers seem to be voting with their feet and preferring to shop there, but also that the formats and sizes and simplicity of operation are better suited to retailers, and they, of course, also want to follow where customers are. So I think we've got a kind of from a directional point of view, we've got every stakeholder, everybody with a vested interest in retail property and opening and reaching those retail properties is looking very positively at retail parks. The other thing as well that we're beginning to see is a combination of retail and leisure, so moving away from it being purely a retail destination, and that's not to be and even just thinking about from a traditional point of view, a retail destination with a broad mixed use of daily essentials, kind of supermarkets, drugstores, and so on, but then also with fashion, with clothing, with a broader range and some dining, is actually that by including leisure, which would have traditionally been things like bowling and cinemas, which is still again having part to play, because with one destination, a family or a group of visitors can extend their stay there quite comfortably. We're now beginning to see more outdoor activity being combined. where there's those opportunities, where there's the right type of space, where there's the right type of location. And that suddenly begins to open up a lot more options for customers, for people who are traveling there. And I think that's what makes it a really rich kind of place for investment and for thinking, is that there are more compelling reasons for customers to visit, and therefore more compelling reasons for retailers to position themselves in these types of assets.
Yeah, exactly. We're talking to one, a good example you give down about a location that really incorporates leisure and, outdoor pursuit beyond, like you say, the bowling and so on. We're talking to one large corporate landlord, and they are developing a retail park that's performing really, really well for them. They're making the most of the fact that there's a lot of adjacent green space, and they're linking in with local councils, and they're doing all sorts of exciting work to really broaden out the appeal from what is really a very traditional horseshoe-shaped retail space, with a very traditional array of shops, and they're looking at how they can turn that into a destination for the whole family, for days out, where shopping is very much part of the piece, or it's a component, but it's not the end game. It's not the absolutely essential reason or only reason to visit.
And that's what we think is really important about this opportunity, where it presents itself. Obviously, there's plenty of places where it's just not an option because there's no space. But where it does present itself, what it really does is encourages the potential for repeat visits and for different reasons to come, and therefore a richness of opportunity. But the other thing we wanted to talk about was as well as driving to was drive-thrus as well, which is the other type of, just to go back to the kind of real estate side, it's the other type of retail asset from a hospitality point of view that we're seeing a lot of demand for at the moment. So why do you think that is, Sarah?
Well, I mean, it's a trend that obviously in the US, drive-through has been around for a very long time and has been very popular. That it's a different landscape. It's very car driven, and there's a lot more space, to point out two of the obvious factors. But we have seen that drive-through spaces. There's huge pressure. There's I think it was P3, Thomas Rose at P3 was talking about brands really in a race for space, because of course there are only a certain number of plots that are going to suit, that are on a busy roundabout or on a busy road at a busy junction, that have the necessary passing traffic to make the drive-through work. The current picture for drive-through, you've got McDonald's at 938, this is in the UK, KFC at 445, Costa at 316, Starbucks close behind 284, Burger King 155, and then Greggs, relatively new entrance, at 17. And it's just interesting to see how this is growing. We know that Greggs is looking for more drive-through spaces, as well as growing in lots of other channels as well. I think there are some possible unknown. The other interesting one, of course, is we read that Gales is going to be launching, I think it's 10 sites in Southeast England in the next 12 months, which we thought was a really interesting sort of departure from how you usually consider drive-through, which is, coffee, hot food, fast food. Those are the traditional categories of drive-through I think people instantly think of. So it'll be really interesting to see whether Gales moves away from its core bread proposition, from the core sourdough offer in the drive-through, whether that will still be available, but the focus is going to be more on hot food, cold food, snacks, treats, coffee, that kind of food on the go. Is it going to be more about that than driving through to buy your loaf of sourdough? And how is that going to affect the brand experience? Because you might argue that a lot of the value and the brand experience of Gales is going into one of their stores and soaking up the atmosphere. And while you're queuing to buy your sourdough, you might see the cakes and the pastries on offer and think we'll have one of those as well. So how will that affect sales? What's the plan? It'll be really interesting to see. I'm looking forward to having a go and seeing how the Gales drive-through experience evolves. Seeing what that looks like.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about it is it's a markedly different market position to the rest of the major players there. And what's for anyone who's and I know that some of the audience here are outside of the UK. If you don't know, Gales is a pretty premium bakery offer, which has been around London and the southeast for maybe 15 years now, perhaps a little bit longer. So it's well established with around 40 or 50 sites. But as Sarah said, it's very much focused on baked goods to take home. It has a strong coffee and patisserie offer alongside that, but its core piece is really about baked goods to take home, as well as having spaces to dine in. So there will almost definitely be some sort of reformatting, as Sarah said, and reconfiguring exactly what the priorities are for the drive-through offer. And it's very interesting to see that Michelle from Pret a Manger has just put in the chat that Pret a Manger are looking to open their first drive-through location soon as well. So we can see more premium brands looking at this as a potential area for growth, or again, a bit like our conversation about driving to, getting sites that are closer to where their customers want to purchase, or where they are in the move, where there's a purchase decision. And if that brand was there, they would take that purchase decision with them. One of the challenges in the UK, much more so than some of the larger countries elsewhere, is that because land and space is at a premium, it's quite difficult there aren't enough drive-through sites, I suppose, is really the point. And therefore there's a lot of competition in terms of brands chasing each one. There's an interesting kind of side piece here, which I'll try and do very quickly, is that in the southeast of England, there's a town called Winchester, which is almost a city. Sorry, it's a cathedral city. It's a city. I don't want to offend anybody. A city in the south, in Hampshire, and it's got a very good reputation. It would be perfect for brands like Gales and Pret a Manger to go into, but currently there are challenges. There's a Greggs are trying to site a drive-through there in a space that's owned by a DIY store, taking part of the car park. But the challenge that they've come up against is that those car park spaces are part of the city's overall parking strategy, and therefore by removing about 20 or 25 spaces from that car park, it puts additional pressure on parking, and that because it will put additional pressure on the traffic, it's actually, it's contradicting what the city's strategies are around traffic and parking management. So the city is recommending that planning application is refused. They've recently done the same thing with a McDonald's application for a similar site where they were looking to go into a supermarket car park. So there are certainly challenges to be overcome. It may be a format that works, that customers want and where brands want to be, but there are certainly challenges around realizing that. And these sorts of challenges will continue to be more, well, I think there'll be more rather than less, in the sense that the use of public realm and the thinking about how people move around our towns and cities has come under greater scrutiny through and post-COVID. So there are more likely to be areas with strategies that make it harder for drive-throughs to be built, even if customers and brands would like them.
There was a similar story in The Guardian recently about Starbucks wanting to open a drive-through in an area of Glasgow that's quite central to the city and where car ownership is very low. So the argument there is that what benefit would this be to the immediate community? This is a drive-through. Many people here don't own cars, so they're not going to be using it, and it's going to encourage traffic from other parts of the city into which, of course, on paper no one really wants. So yeah, I think there will be elements of local opposition and community groups, and if a precedent is set, then that's always something that people can draw. Going back to the Greggs and Winchester example, there are apparently two branches of Greggs within Winchester, but because they're sort of on foot destinations in the city centre, then it's not necessarily about the brand, as you say, Dan. It's about the parking strategy. It's about the access. It's about what that does to drive demand. So even though it's the wonderfully convenient option, it's the speedy option, or at least there's the perception of speed. I suppose it depends on the queue as to whether it's actually quicker to drive it in that way. But yeah, whether customers want it, how much they want it, there are going to be challenges, I think. And one other challenge, which we think is hopefully a temporary one, is that it seems to be very difficult to pass your driving test at the moment. There are no slots available. And one of the writers in the Sunday Times was saying there were no slots available within 25 miles of her home when she tried to book one. So we did wonder whether actually in the future are younger people not learning to drive, but they seem to only be putting it off by a few years. It seems to be that in the UK, you still do need to be able to drive. Realistically, it's still an aspiration. So from that point of view, I think drive-throughs are going to still, be in demand.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think if we forget the kind of the UK specific property challenges for a minute, it's worth thinking of where and what else, what other brands might this sort of format benefit. And we've been talking about this over the last couple of weeks, and we haven't really come up with any amazing new ideas. In fact, banking was one of the early and popular drive-through functions in Europe, across Germany and in parts of, I think, Austria and France. Yeah.
And it was also the first drive-through in the US was actually a bank. It was the Grand National Bank of St. Louis, Missouri in 1930.
Thank you very much. But I think, we can all see that technology has somewhat overtaken the need for physical banking in most locations. And certainly there isn't a need for a premium type of real estate to deliver that. Where we are seeing some interest is still very much in food, but there's a great brand in the US, a vegan burger brand that has just taken on what was a McDonald's site in Sunset Boulevard. Thank you. And it was I couldn't remember quite where it was.
Yeah, it's called Hart's House. Kevin Hart was the chef, I think. And the idea is, so he's taken this ex-McDonald's site, which presumably was very high grossing.
So.
But perhaps it's a measure of changing customer taste that given the location, it made sense for McDonald's to give it up. We can only speculate, but it's really good vegan food, no cholesterol, no antibiotics, healthy, and relatively inexpensive in an area that is, traditionally very pricey.
Relatively expensive in the sense that it's not a premium product, but in terms of a fast food price banding, it's at least double what you would expect. It's double what you would expect from Burger King or McDonald's. So that's where we see the potential for drive-through to stretch for sure, which is actually by moving upwards, by finding ways and formats and menus as well, because there will need to be menu development, because as we sort of said for example, with Gales, that core product is not necessarily going to be relevant in the drive-through market. So they may well need to dial up all the convenience elements, and they may even need some new things to make sure that they've got a compelling all day or even, close to 24-hour offer. So, brands need to think carefully about what they're taking in if they're not in that core fast food area. But also there's another brand, Leon, in the UK, who currently only have one site, but they're healthy fast food option, much more mid-priced. But we think that they've got a lot of legs. Their ownership is now with the Issa brothers, who own Asda, who are one of the 4 biggest supermarkets in the UK, and they also own several thousand petrol stations with convenience stores attached. So we see that actually maybe rather than focusing on drive-throughs in the short term, they'll be looking at how the Leon brand can go into all of their existing estate and leverage that. But that kind of differentiation that we see there's been space in the market for different types of offers to go into drive-through, because we're seeing a diversification of tastes, and we're seeing people wanting, not just convenience, but a choice of quality as well.
Absolutely.
Amazing. Thank you both. It's a great topic. It's a great 2 topics. Firstly, congratulations, Michelle and Brett, for opening your first drive-through. Well done. Looking forward to testing that now. We have a question from Edward. Mindful of these experiential brands developing drive-through options, how do you see the brand DNA being delivered through the design?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question. And actually, the Kevin Hart's concept that we were just talking about in California, in Los Angeles, has got quite a distinctive architecture around it. So while we are in the West Coast and we are in the land of that kind of post-50s kind of diner, drive-through architecture with a long heritage, there are cues to that. It's got very high-pitched roofs. It's actually quite a small, compact design, which looks very different while still retaining those design cues. And I think that's a key, is going to actually be thinking about the architecture as well as the design of all of the interaction points. If we think of many drive-throughs also have dine-in, so let's not forget that they're dual function. Most of them are not purely take out through the car. So there is then that opportunity to think about what the interior experience feels like. But if the predominant experience is going to be in the car, then the important touch points are going to be about brand signage and brand visibility from the road, about the architecture, the shapes of the building, the way that the building expresses certain key brand elements. And then of course, the most important thing is the interfaces, the way in which you order and interact with the brand. So a lot of drive-throughs, you'll be ordering in advance, or as you're in a queue on an app, placing the order in advance. There'll still be the traditional getting up to the window or to the device and talking to a customer. So those key touch points will be very much about how does that brand express itself on screen in person. And then, of course, when you receive the delivery, what is your collateral? What's your brand collateral like for all of your packaging, for your takeaway packaging? What's the bag? What's the cup? What are the boxes?
How sustainable?
Exactly.
That sort of thing.
Yeah. So it's not just about design; it's about what elements is the brand projecting and how functionally does that do it. And absolutely, if you're not already a drive-through brand, then it's a great opportunity to really look at that collateral for a drive-through specific purpose. Not, also from a practical point of view, what type of tray, if you're giving meals for 4 people in a car who then want to continue their journey while eating, how do you give them that product in a way that is stable and sustainable and shareable and keeps things warm? So there's actually quite a lot of complexity around it, but it's a great opportunity for those new touch points to be developed and to make a real difference, and also to re-energize the brand, because your customers are going to start to interact with your brand in a different way from the way they do now.
Wow. It really is an end-to-end kind of cycle. We have one more question. How do you see retail parks evolving?
We touched on this, didn't we? We talked about them becoming all-day destinations as much as just places to visit for functional shopping experiences that were efficient and easy to navigate, which I think is what they traditionally have been. You wouldn't think of a retail park necessarily. You might think of it as a series of sort of spray boxes with a central car park, not necessarily a fun or desirable or pleasurable place to go. But what we're seeing now is that where leisure can be incorporated, where the shopping can just be one component, or where even you might go to do some homewares or apparel shopping, but finish up in a supermarket, because now we're seeing not just the homewares and the clothing, we're seeing the supermarket, the food element included there as well. So I think trying to make it pleasurable and useful rather than purely useful. I'd say that's the overarching.
Yeah, I would say that most places can dial up their hospitality mix. More journeys, are now being, and I don't mean specifically car journeys or to retail parks, don't have that research, but as a driver of people traveling out of home and into spaces where they might come across retail or interact with retail or spend money, of course, food and drink is a really important part of that. So I think there is definitely an opportunity for property owners to dial up the number and the variety of food, much in the way that we've talked about what's happening where the potential for growth is in drive-through, but also just to lean on the leisure part of it more that Sarah touched on. There's a really great brand that we both love in the US, which is called Rei, which is spelled REI, which is an outdoors brand. And their concept, we'd love to see that go everywhere in the world, really. Their concept is so good. They in each store, and again, the US is one of the great places in the world for outdoor activities. So they've got a richness of natural options, of mountains and cycle tracks and all kinds of stuff. But each store is at a leisure destination or in a leisure area, and each store majors on what that local those local options are. So if it's in the mountains, it's very much about mountaineering, climbing, hiking, skiing, all of those things. But there will then be also a climbing wall in that store, and not just a token one, and actually, a climbing tower on the side of the store. And they employ experts. If you don't know the brand as a retailer, as a case study, they're a fantastic case study of what you do with a good concept, a confident implementation, and a great recruitment and staff retention policy to get people who love the product that you're selling, who love the activity that sits around that product. And I think that those kind of innovative concepts are perfect for retail parks and are perfect for different sorts of destinations. and it could work globally. So I'd really like to see. I'd like to see something more like that outside of the US and spreading elsewhere.
You've just made me think, when you're talking about recruiting subject matter experts, it makes me think of booksellers.
Mhm.
When you have really passionate booksellers in bookstores, and that's something that I think we don't tend to see at retail pubs, but why not a glorious flagship bookstore where you can really go and lose yourself and immerse yourself, and with plenty of places to sit and browse, and really take the time to speak to people who understand the product they're selling and love it, and have a deep knowledge for it.
Totally. And we know that, everywhere globally, we've been in the last year, from New York to London, of course, to Singapore, to talking to clients in Australia, and Denmark. Even I was in Denmark last week. Everywhere that we go, the same staffing challenges are present in terms of finding the right quality of people, retaining people, and in fact, even the number of people available to work in the potential workforce pool. So while we, it's easy to sit here and sing about great staff and how it makes a real difference, what's really important is that if you can find and keep those people, it does make a real difference, because everybody is struggling right now. So finding those good people, working out how you can retain them, and giving them reasons to share their expertise, whether it's books or outdoors or fantastic food or just great service, looking after people. All of those things are really important. And Pret is a great brand, and I'm sure we'll all agree that, from a service point of view, my last experience with Pret was on Thursday morning at 5 in the morning at Heathrow Airport before I flew to Denmark. And the staff were excellent, friendly, chatty, did exactly what you wanted. So that stays with you. So that's why it is so important to try and get that bit right and invest in your people, because it's hard right now, but it will make the difference against your competitors.
Absolutely. Completely agree. Okay, we have time for one more question. Let's make it a good one. Here we go. Okay. As your personal opinion, or since you guys have been doing a lot of research on this, what would you like to see in a drive-through format that you haven't already seen? I'm guessing, but use your imagination. Let it go wild.
Yeah, well, we tried to think about retail concepts that could work in a drive-through, but all we ended up doing was kind of reinventing a clunky click and collect option. So less good than things that already exist and don't have a reason. So we still think very much around food and drink and hospitality. But yeah, I think a brand, really what I'm excited to see here is Gales and Pret moving into the market here, and not taking it upmarket as in cutlery and craziness, but broadening the choice, broadening the types of offers that are available in that format. And that's where we think the innovation will come from, because we ought to see, as we've already said, we should see product innovation alongside that, not just lifting and dropping the exact same menu, understanding that there are different need states of people when they're on a journey, or if they're not on a journey, they just want to go somewhere because they've got two overtired kids in the back of their car and they don't want to get out and go through all the hassle. So it's and absolutely, as Michelle was saying, they're looking at dialing up their hot food when they go into drive-through. So I think it's exactly the right idea. So I think let's just watch this space. I think it's going to be a really interesting 5-10 years ahead of us in this sector.
Absolutely. Michelle, thank you for your input on this. This is great. It would be great to continue this conversation at another time. Do email us. Okay, thank you. Is there anything else, Sarah, Dan, you want to add?
I don't think so. I think that takes us up to 1 o'clock, doesn't it? So we've
absolutely. So we've covered a half an hour lunch break. It's wonderful. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Dan, Sarah. It was absolutely wonderful today. If you want to speak to us about this topic anymore, if you want to contact us, you can follow us on any of our social channels, or email us at enquiries@cada.co.uk. We also will be posting this video on our YouTube channel and the sound on our podcast, which you can now listen to on Spotify as of last week. So we're very excited about that. Also on Amazon Music and on Podbean and Google Podcasts. Thank you, everyone. We hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye for now.